It's the first day of a brand new OTA metagame. Let's take a look at some decks that are taking the meta by storm. To start with, the buff to multiple man has highlighted something that has sort of always been true, but not necessarily been taken advantage of until now, which is how many cheap cards there are in the game that just happen to give things the ability to move or to move those things, and how interesting it is that we get this kind of buff in a metagame where there is a card that is very interested in making sure that what you do with it is as many copies of its buff as possible. Shou-Lao on a multiple man might seem like a pretty ridiculous thing, but honestly, that's exactly what people were saying about Shou-Lao on a Scarlet Spider only 2 weeks ago. I think it's actually worth taking a look at what this deck can really do, because there's some real interest in figuring out the deck that is best able to utilize the power output Shou-Lao has. At the same time as many of the mid-rangey decks are cutting out combo pieces in order to get interaction, the multiple man version of the list is going all combo all the time, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic. One of the interesting things about Shou-Lao is that it is sort of functionally, or it has played as in the past, a combo deck that occasionally gets to free roll basically the existence of Deafening Chord and maybe one other tech card, similar to the old Invisible Woman First Steps decks, but a little bit less dynamic and probably a little bit weaker. That is to say that it ranges from being a mid-rangey, this is good stats for the value card, to a combo-y, this is an absurd amount of stats for the value card, depending on whether or not you're able to multiply the buff. But you're almost never able to multiply the buff, say, 3 or 4 times in a normal deck. And it is actually kind of possible to do that as long as you're willing to take a turn early on that buff. You can make that happen here. Large multiple men will beat a lot of Shou-Lao decks. It's just the other games that you have to play. Now, there are a lot of interesting things going on here outside of that. The buff things that we have with Penny Parker, with Maverick, all of these things allowing this deck to massively output points. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is like, wow, the best deck of all time. But what I am going to sit here and say is 2 weeks ago, nobody would have believed Scarlet Spider was viable. There could very easily be something similarly true for multiple man here. Next up is Big Baby's Phantom X list, a list that looks at all of the various crazy combo things, and yes, I am including Shou-Lao in this, happening in the metagame, and says, what if we played the world's grindiest, mid-range deck instead? This is, of course, a Phantom X list that does all the things a Phantom X list is meant to do. It wins games on 1 in 6 gambits on the final turn of the game. It throws priority so it can properly Shadow King your Maverick lane or whatever. It blows things up and moves them to the right location and has way less points than you on average, but still somehow manages to pull out wins. Classic mid-rangey list here. I would not say this is a list that I think you should go out of your way to pick up, but if you are looking for Phantom X lists, I will say I've been weirdly impressed with him. I'm not saying greatest card ever, but he is sort of just in a lane of his own. And yes, a lot of that lane is just Gambit exists. Wild Child is a 2/9. There's just some good stats and some reasonable interaction that you can have access to in these decks. But I have actually just kind of been impressed with his space. I wish they were a little more generous with him in the OTAs so I could seriously look at you and say that this is something that can compete on the level of Shou-Lao. I don't particularly believe that it is. It's very often going to be at a point disadvantage that you're going to have to skill diff or Captain Marvel diff your way out of. Another card that if you're having trouble with that matchup, you could try instead of Zombie Captain Marvel is Lady Deathstrike. It's quite good against various forms of, I'm going to put a bunch of 3s on the board. Oh, look, my Maverick, I'm going to activate it on the final turn of the game. No, you're not. It's actually not there anymore. That kind of stuff is pretty reasonable in the case of this. The being a Killmonger deck against a deck that is playing as many 1-drops as those decks tend to be. There's a lot of Icemen, Spider-Ham running around. You don't really want to hit those with a Gambit, so you get rid of them with a Killmonger. All that stuff should be pretty straightforward. This deck has less points than the decks it's trying to beat, but it has uniquely positioned an interesting interaction against them. I've been seeing people talk about Supergiant, and I think Supergiant is a fine enough choice into Shou-Lao. I don't think it's as good as people think that it is, because the problem you run into is like, okay, I've stopped them from doing their combo. Their Shou-Lao is still more points than my guys, and so you kind of have to make that up somewhere else. That's sort of like the biggest argument for why Shou-Lao is a problem, is that like, all right, you know, I super gianted them. They're not Shou-Lao comboing their giant guy anymore, and it's like, yeah, okay, they're just playing a 520. And again, you can beat it, but it's far from the free win that I think people might think that it is to disrupt that card. It is close enough, but it's not necessarily exactly there. Now, this is a reasonably powerful list that I like, but it does run into an issue with another one of the top decks, which is the Iris list. Of course, that being the Kraven, Sam, Batroc, Thing First Steps list, various formations of that. I believe Iris is currently rank 1, and people who beat her keep posting it on Reddit every time they do. I would like to highly encourage this behavior as long as it's not aimed at me. Now, all seriousness, I do think that that matchup is probably the worst thing for this deck, but it's also the kind of deck that doesn't really exist outside of high elo. It's a very difficult deck to play, and so this deck could get conceivably a lot better the further down you go in rank. I can absolutely see this. Dragon of the Moon's buff is actually pretty relevant here, because this is a deck that cares a lot about just like having stats on the board in order to make sure that like, okay, I'm going to play Iron Patriot, I'm going to play Dragon of the Moon, then I'm going to play, figure out what lane that the Supergiant 6 power is going to win and put it in there. That kind of stuff also makes sense to me. I think there's a lot to be said for a list like this. I really do. I don't necessarily think it's perfectly going to line up, but I am happy to look at a deck like this and be like, you know, this is kind of similar to the stuff we used to play, and it's really not all that bad. Like, this is like a very 2023-ass deck, Ronin Iron Lad, and it's like, okay, you know, that's not the worst thing in the world. The Iris deck itself has settled on a Lin Lielis configuration. Now, this is Iris's list. I believe Cougar is like a little bit differently. Basically, what I've seen is they disagree over how often it should be Prowler and how often it should be Miles Morales. I think those two cards are basically flippable. One of the other things Cougar did was cut Thing First Steps for Deafening Chord, which I think is a very valid thing to do. If you're looking for like budget replacements, you can replace Prowler with Miles Morales. You can replace Thing First Steps with Deafening Chord. And I think you will mostly have a functional, powerful list here. What this deck's real core is the Batroc Sam Kraven early game mixed with Juggernaut and Cosmo in the late game, and that kind of disruption is the only thing that really puts a deck on the tier of a Shou-Lao list. I would not be surprised if this was actually the best deck in the game in the hands of a competent player. It's just a lot harder for this list to be played by players who are not on that level. This is an extremely decision-intensive list that really needs you to have exact knowledge of what your opponent is doing. Thing First Steps serves as a bit of a buyout clause where you're just like, oh, I totally missed that. There's a Cerebro deck. I need something that can do something about that. He is a great card in the sense that he is just a reasonable enough body. Like, the body is just fine. It's not the greatest body in the world, but it's a good body that just randomly wins you all sorts of situations that no other card could ever possibly do. He is the Swiss Army knife of this deck, but he is a little surplus to requirements in the sense that I love the guy, but I do think you can budget replace him with the Deafening Chord and get a lot of that as well. Zombie Galacti is in a pretty interesting spot. There's some real beef in this list, and I think that that is mainly the case that we would want to make the maximal case for here. You just want to play a deck that has a sort of Hela-ish disposition. And that's what Zombie Galacti is trying to do right now. This is just a deck that is vaguely Hela-ish, and it hopefully will go over the top of any sort of Shou-Lao combo list and just sort of put them in the dumpster, not really worry about it, just go forward from it. It has the ability to play both D-Chord and Wing Beat now. Deafening Chord could be a Spider Ham if you are so inclined. There are upsides and downsides to both. I plan on doing a stream with Jay Walla, a fully Zombie Galacti stream tonight, Friday at 11 p.m. Eastern. So hopefully we'll be able to get some of that happening. So maybe we'll have a video on this, a guide to it, that kind of stuff up on the channel in the coming days. I think largely the case for this is that everyone is doing all this like, all right, we got to figure out how to make my Shou-Lao deck beat the Shou-Lao deck, which means I'm going to play like Stardust or whatever. And it's like, all right, what if we just played a deck that was just like, I'm going to make a bunch of points? What if I just wanted to make a bunch of points and ignore what my opponent was doing and not care about any of that stuff? I'm going to make a bunch of points. And that's sort of the case. That's the bull case for this deck being a good choice in this metagame. And I'm certainly going to put it to the test tonight. There's a basketball writer and podcaster that I really love. His name is Zach Lowe. One of the things that he does on his channel is like things I like and don't like. And I think that that's what this deck makes me feel. When it comes to this deck, there's things I like and don't like. So the things I like about this deck, I like that it has recognized that it doesn't really want to be an Enchantress deck anymore. I like that it is aware of that. I like that it's like, okay, I don't want to do that. I want to play a different interactive card. I care way more about interacting with this onboard activate BS, so I'm going to play Red Guardian instead. I like that it recognizes that it doesn't want to be an Enchantress card anymore. What I don't like is that I don't think it can't be an Enchantress deck anymore. That's the thing that gets me. What, are you going to play when are you going to play the Red Guardian? When is it actually coming out? And like, that's the thing that really gets me. The only times I'm able to play this are on the final turn of the game with a 4-cost 6-drop from Valentina, and then I play the Red Guardian alongside it because I have 7 energy because of all the stuff that I'm doing. I like that it recognizes it doesn't want to be an Enchantress deck anymore. I do. I really do. I just don't think that that's a good omen for the archetype. Like, my worry is not that this is a bad change, but that the reason this change is happening is indicative of the whole archetype feeling a lot of pressure right now and not having an actual, there just isn't a card. What you want is like 5/8 super adaptoid or whatever. You want like that kind of thing, right? You want like 5/8 ongoing activates here, can't be activated. That's the card you want to be playing in this list. But that card doesn't exist. And so you end up just playing like worse versions of it to keep this deck in the same space. And I'm not sure that ends up being worth what is being asked of you. Because like, seriously, when are you playing the freaking Red Guardian? When your opponent is forcing you to go off curve to play a Red Guardian, they're already winning that trade. They have already won because you have played a Red Guardian instead of something that actually helps you. I like the correct recognition that it doesn't want to be an Enchantress deck. I don't like that the deck, the archetype, simply doesn't have anything else that can go in there. And that is my little things I like and don't like about the way Ramp is adapting to this metagame. Hela's a Ramp deck, right? I mean, this is what Dennis is playing. It's the Anti-Stardust Ramp Hela, where the idea is one way or another, here's a bunch of points of power, figure it out. And that's a very solid thing to be doing. It takes away a lot of like Hela's combo lines. A shocking amount of Hela combo lines are sort of Odin predicated. This is very much like a rampy Hela list that is doing rampy Hela things. You still get some cool Grandmaster stuff going on in here. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of cool combo stuff to be had here, but it is a little more like stripped back, toned down, Rick Rubin, like let's take all of this stuff out of it. I think that this is a reasonable way to go, but it's mostly a response to just people playing Stardust. And I think it's probably time to talk about a couple of Shou-Lao decks because that's a lot of why people are playing Stardust. For example, Ika's list. I know it's pronounced Ika. I'm sorry. This list is the sort of first one I saw that was tuned to be a Stardust list. I will say my first instinct here is I want to cut Viv Vision for Maverick, but I decided not to do that out of respect to Ika, although I don't respect him enough to consistently get his name correctly, much like apparently many Marvel Snap cards. I do think that this is a good direction for people to go, but I do have some open, like, just part of me is like, okay, they played a 4/5 the doubles, and yes, you're gonna have priority because they're gonna sack their Shou-Lao. They're gonna like wait on that, right? So you should be able to prevent their 4/5 spider from happening. You're also gonna cover some Hela outputs. You're gonna cover some Dragon Lord stuff. You're gonna cover Jubilee. You're gonna cover some other things in the metagame, and so like it's not like the worst card I've ever seen. But I do sort of wonder if it's just like, is this actually a trade upwards? You know, when people were like, oh, you should play Mobius to prevent Scar from beating you, right? And then, like, everything in the deck was like a 4/10, and it's like, I'm very happy to see you played a 3/3. I don't really care about that. I sort of feel like that's sort of a similar dynamic here, which is not to say that, like, This is much closer to being like on par with the thing that it's countering a lot of the time. But I am a little suspicious that it's like a thing we should be doing instead of just playing a Scarlet Spider. Like, I don't necessarily hate all the things that are going on here. I think it's cool, but like, I do kind of wonder about like the efficacy of this kind of thing. I like that the Clea stuff adds a pretty clean way to like try to counterplay Maverick things. Joaquin Torres Clea is extremely powerful. Like, I like the stuff Viv Vision is enabling here, but part of me is like, what if we just got a Maverick in here instead? Like, I like the neg power thing going on here to deal with the things other Shou-Lao decks are doing. I'm going to apply negative power to your Scarlet Spider. I'm going to apply negative power to your Maverick. I'm going to apply negative power via Lockheed, via Clea. All this stuff is going on that. I think that's really clever. I wonder if there's a way to do that while still maintaining at least one of our own combo pieces, right? At least one of Maverick in here. That's the big thing that comes up to me is like, I like where this is at. I like what this is doing. I want to see if I can get the best of both worlds out of it. The Sizer stock Shou-Lao list, of course, also on Stardust at this point. The interesting thing about Stardust is Stardust complements Shadow King, which I think is pretty interesting because typically my analysis in week 1 of Shou-Lao was Shadow King's actually terrible to play in these decks because if you play it, they're just going to like, they throw priority and they're better than you, right? You never get a good chance to play it. And if you do get a good chance to play it, it's across multiple lanes and he's not doing enough. He's just always bad on 6 because it means you didn't get your Shou-Lao, which means you're probably going to lose no matter what's going on here. The Stardust makes it a much more palatable thing because it means that there isn't a thing going across multiple lanes. And that is what enables Shadow King to be good in the first place. And I think it's interesting that these cards are working synergistically to address the matchup in a way that I wouldn't have honestly expected. It's something I didn't see coming. And I think it's a pretty cool thing to be doing. But I do have the same sort of fundamental questions where it's like, okay, why are we cutting Maverick here? Like, what are we, look at what we're giving up. I understand that we want to do this stuff. I get it. But like, look at what we're giving up here. We're giving up so much. One thing Sizer really likes about the Annihilus version of this list is that you can use Sentry to set up priority in ways that guarantee that you either have it or don't have it. It gives you a lot more control over that, which is, I think, a very valid thing. I still really wonder about the efficacy of the Annihilus here. It has been very medium in my experience. But largely, I think these two decks sort of demonstrate what approach Shou-Lao decks are taking. They're trying to figure out how to be the Shou-Lao deck that beats the other Shou-Lao decks, whether that be with like Iceman Spider-Ham stuff or Cable or all this other stuff, right? Somehow, some way, people are going to figure that out. And that is the deck that people are going to have to react to. I think a lot of Shou-Lao is that people saw the sort of maximal combo versions, but that output isn't guaranteed because there are going to be decks that are going to build themselves to beat those decks. And then we're going to have to deal with like the sort of small, stripped down, mid-rangey Shou-Lao. And that's where the real test of how busted this card actually is going to come in. I'm not saying he won't get nerfed. I think it's very, very possible. But I do think we're finally getting to a point where these decks are optimizing versus each other rather than just saying, here's the most amount of points I can possibly make with the new card. And that's a pretty cool thing. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.